Well, good morning again.
Good morning.
It's good to have you all here. And this morning, I want to talk a little bit about what we do in the Lifestyle Center and why. Because a lot of what we're doing there is stuff that over time we've discovered to be useful from many different points of view. Thriving in health, making sense of the recommendations. Lifestyle choices, and a little bit of philosophy to start with. But let me just bow my head for a word of prayer. Dear Father in heaven, again we want to ask your Holy Spirit to guide our minds, that we may understand the things that are most useful to us. And we thank you in Jesus' name. Amen. Have you noticed the hand of God today? When you look outside, you see the wonders of nature. And we know that God keeps everything in order. He keeps the earth going around the sun. He keeps us alive. In God we live and move and have our being. Every breath, every throb of the heart. Can everybody feel their pulse? You wondering if God's power is still in your life? There it is. Because every throb of your pulse comes from God as a continual evidence of the power of an ever-present God. And so I ask the question, if God is keeping me alive every minute, everything about me is under His control, couldn't He just as well keep me alive healthy as sick? And what would make the difference between being healthy or sick? Well, that's a good question, because we know God would probably want everybody to be healthy and well, so something must be limiting His power or holding His hand, keeping Him from being able to do things. And we look to Exodus 15:26 to help us. If thou wilt diligently hearken unto the voice of the Lord thy God, and will do that which is right in His sight, and will give ear to His commandments and keep His statutes, He says, I will put none of these diseases upon thee, which I brought upon the Egyptians, for I am the Lord that healeth thee. And so part of His healing plan is being in harmony with the laws that He has set up in our being. The laws that control whether we're healthy or not. You know, in the early days of our pioneers, before our health message came in, a lot of our ministers were dying around the age 45. They were eating pork, they were eating all kinds of things. And their health sort of testified to it. Well, God, didn't you need those ministers? Couldn't you have kept them alive? Well, there's something about maybe a contract in the great controversy between God and Satan that if people don't follow the will of the Lord, then Satan says, you can't have them, God. You can't protect them, God. You can't take care of them because they aren't following your will. There's something about this that God wants us to be in harmony with His laws. The Creator of man has arranged the living machinery in our bodies, of our bodies. Every function is wonderfully and wisely made. And God has pledged Himself to keep this machinery in healthful action if the human agent will obey His laws and cooperate with God. Every law governing the human machinery is to be considered just as truly divine in origin, in character, and importance as the Word of God. Every careless, inattentive action, any abuse put upon the Lord's wonderful mechanism by disregarding His specific laws in the human habitation is a violation of God's law. We may behold and admire the work of God in the natural world, but the human habitation is most wonderful. Those who perceive the evidence of God's love, who understand something of the wisdom and beneficence of His laws. It's all based on love, isn't it? And the blessings that result from obedience will come to regard their duties and obligations from an altogether different point of view. Instead of looking upon an observance of the laws of health as a matter of sacrifice or self-denial, they will regard it, as it really is, an inestimable blessing. And so God has sought to bless us, to give us the best evidence. And this is a quote that Frank has quoted several times. If the sick and suffering will do only as well as they know in regard to living out the principles of health reform, perseveringly, then they will, in 9 cases out of 10, recover from their ailments. Which tells me that in 9 cases out of 10, the cause of disease is really something we did. It's not that we're born blind and who can figure out whose fault it is, or the devil put sores on us. It was our own doing. Oh yes, sometimes there's something that happens when the devil, in the case of Job, puts sores on you. But for the most part, there's things we could do different that would help. Doing in faith what you know to be right. Isn't that true faith? You can't in faith do what you know to be wrong. That would be presumption, wouldn't it? And so let's think about how we put together our program here for the lifestyle guests and what elements of it are very important, why people would get better on this, why we've seen a lot of success with people following such a program. And I'll just sort of take it step by step here. And first of all, though, we have a very specific schedule. We have times laid out. And we sort of have an appointment. You know, if you don't show up at 1:30 for lunch, well, you know, it's important to be on time. And timing has a lot to do with health. The other day we talked about soybeans having a clock, and they always follow the clock. And this is true of our bodies in every way. And so having a regular schedule, brethren and sisters must not be sick upon the encampment, talking about the campgrounds for camp meeting. If they clothe themselves properly in the chill of the morning and night, and are particular to vary their clothing according to the changing weather, so as to preserve proper circulation and strictly observe regularity in sleeping and in eating of simple food, taking nothing between meals, they need not be sick. And so there's some of the rules. They may be well during the meeting. Their minds may be clear and able to appreciate the truth. And they may return to their homes refreshed in body and in spirit. And so timing has a lot to do with stuff, being on a regular schedule. People who aren't on a regular schedule have a lot of problems. If it falls to your lot to prepare the meals, make careful calculations and give yourself all the time necessary to prepare the food and set it on the table in good order and on exact time. To have the meal ready 5 minutes earlier than the time you have set is more commendable than to have it 5 minutes later. So we're talking very tight schedule. Does it make a difference? It makes a huge difference. For example, rheumatoid arthritis. Big problem in rheumatoid arthritis is a mismatch in the circadian rhythms for the cortisol and the melatonin. The only cure then is not methotrexate or some other funny drug. It is to get the timing of their circadian rhythms all in order with exact meal times, exact getting up times and going to bed times on every day of the week, not just on weekdays. And when they do this, it makes a huge difference. I had a young lady with psoriasis, bad psoriasis. She's like 21, and well, we sat down with her, and the big part of her program that we straightened out was her schedule. We did a few other things too that would probably follow this plan that we're going to go through here today. But when she followed a tight schedule, she said her psoriasis was the best it had ever been in her life, and she'd had it since she was quite young. And so timing makes a huge difference. People who eat at the same time every day sleep better at night. They have lower cholesterols. They have less inflammation in their bodies, less likely to get diabetes and cancer. All kinds of things improve when people have regularity in sleeping and eating. Now, we picked a rising time of 5:30. Why 5:30? Well, it's good to get up early. It's good to have regular hours for rising and praying and eating. But why 5:30? Well, it has a lot to do with when we send them to bed because, we want 8 hours of sleep. And what's a good bedtime? Well, for students, lights should be out at 9:30. Well, why would we pick an early time like that? Most of the world likes to get the 10 o'clock news. What would life be like if you didn't know what the spin doctors are trying to feed you? The 10 o'clock news, as Neil Nedley points out, 17 minutes of news increases your risk of depression by a massive amount. But people who get to bed at 9:30 have a much higher rise in melatonin in the early hours of the morning. And it's very predictable when it will hit. If you go to bed at 11, your melatonin, it'll be all over the charts, both in how much, and it'll always be too low, and where it hits. And so the timing of going to bed is very important. We'll hit that more when we get to that part of the chart. But I have people get up in the morning and take a cool, not necessarily cold, but cool shower or sponge bath. Well, what does that do for you besides drive you crazy? Well, it's very good. Most persons would receive benefit from a cool or tepid bath every day, morning and evening. Especially upon rising in the morning, most persons would be benefited by taking a sponge or hand bath. This will remove all impurities from the skin and keep it moist and supple, thereby aiding the circulation. A lot of these people suffer from poor circulation. Perfect health depends on perfect circulation. Persons in health would on no account neglect frequent bathing. Whether a person is sick or well, respiration is rendered more free, so for our lung patients, and full by bathing. The mind and body are alike invigorated. The muscles become more flexible. Every faculty of the intellect is made brighter. You like to be brighter? The bath is a soother of the nerves. And that's important for people because they're all stressed out. Instead of increasing the liability of taking cold, it fortifies against cold. Studies of people who are put in cold water before going out, usually military recruits because they don't have a choice, but put in cold water before they go out in the cold, it's discovered that their white cell count goes up. It's more active and ready to take care of any insults that happen in cold weather. Because it improves the circulation, the blood is brought to the surface and a more easy and regular flow of the vital fluid is obtained. And so we start them off with a good, cool sponge bath. Then we have them drink water, maybe with some lemon in it. In the morning, I take lemon and water, she says. I drink nothing between meals unless occasionally some lemon and water. So thousands have died for want of pure water and pure air who might have lived. Most Americans are dehydrated. Why are they dehydrated? Well, part of it has to do with competing drinks. Anything with sugar or caffeine in it tends to dehydrate you rather than to hydrate you. Also, if you eat sugar, your thirst for water is cut in half. You will drink half as much water spontaneously if you have refined sugar in your diet. So Americans drink too little water. What's more, if you only drink as much water as you're thirsty for, you're still 30% behind. You really need to drink 30% more than what your thirst signal tells you should be drinking. And thousands of invalids who are a burden to themselves and others think that their lives depend upon taking medicines from the doctors. We could do a whole talk on medicines from the doctors. They are continually guarding themselves against the air and avoiding the use of water. These blessings they need in order to become well. If they would become enlightened and let medicine alone and accustom themselves to outdoor exercise and to air in their houses, summer and winter, and use soft water for drinking and bathing purposes, they would be comparatively well and happy instead of dragging out a miserable existence. And so water, we push a lot of water. If you look on our chart here, we have 3 quarts of water a day for our patients. We sort of have a write-in. You can write in how much, but depending on their size. And then sending them out for a walk early in the morning. Do I have to walk before the sun comes up? morning exercise and walking in the free, invigorating air of heaven, or cultivating flowers and small fruits and vegetables is necessary. Is it optional? Is necessary to a healthful circulation of the blood. It is the surest safeguard against colds, coughs, congestions of the brain and lungs, inflammation of the liver and the kidneys and the lungs, and 100 other diseases. So a morning walk. Send them outside. Getting a walk where there's more negative ions in the air in the morning. There's more negative ions when there's dew on the ground. There's more oxygen in the air because the trees made oxygen out of the carbon dioxide overnight. And there's less pollutants. People haven't had a chance to drive their cars around and suck in some of that air and blow it out with exhaust. And there's a lot of benefits to a morning walk and what's going to happen to the patients. And then we have them drink their tea. It's tea time. And the herbs that grow for the benefit of man, and the little handful of herbs kept and steeped, made into tea for sudden ailments, have served tenfold, yes, 100-fold better purpose than all the drugs hidden under mysterious names and dealt out to the sick. And so the herbs are beneficial. You can get different herbs. You can talk to Brent about different herbs for different ailments. And herbs can be very helpful, and for our patients, that's their tea time. And then they have their devotional time. And we must remember that if God's going to heal these folks, sometimes they won't be healed until they get it right with God. And sometimes the disease is a result of not having it right with God. Religion tends directly to promote health, to lengthen life, and to heighten our enjoyment of all its blessings. And so they have their devotional time when they can spend time alone. And part of that includes being thankful for three things. Gratitude therapy. Nothing tends more to promote health of body and of soul than does a spirit of gratitude and praise. It is a positive duty to resist melancholy, discontented thoughts and feelings, as much a duty as it is to pray. If we are heaven-bound, how can we go as a band of mourners? Oh no. Reminds me, one gentleman compared getting up to and going to work as to getting up and going to a amusement park like Disneyland. I remember, I've heard, when I was a kid, we lived near Disneyland down in Loma Linda, and the kids would talk about going to Disneyland. They were excited. They'd get up early. They'd rush off. Well, this motivational speaker said, well, every day should be like going to Disneyland. We're on our way to heaven. It's better than Disneyland. And so, can we mourn? Oh, no, I got rid of Disneyland again. Well, groaning and complaining all along the way to our Father's house. Yes, well, what's that say about your Father? All right, then we have trust and healing, as you know. And worship time. The burden of sin, with its unrest and unsatisfied desires, is the foundation of their maladies in many cases. They can find no relief until they come to the healer of the soul. You won't be able to heal their diabetes until they get this done. You might not be able to heal anything. Probably won't until you can get their minds and hearts at peace with God. The peace which He alone can give would impart vigor to the mind and health to the body. And so that's for us too, in everything we do, making sure that we are right with God. Then we have our breakfast time, and we're shooting for 80% fresh fruit. It is the custom and order of society to take a slight breakfast. Why do people take a slight breakfast? They're not hungry. Because they ate their breakfast the night before, yes. They're all filled up. But this is not the best way to treat the stomach. At breakfast time, the stomach is in a better condition to take care of more food than at the second or third meal of the day. The habit of eating a sparing breakfast and a large dinner is wrong. Make your breakfast correspond more nearly to the heartiest meal of the day. And so, big breakfast. It would be well for us to do less cooking, I read this the other day, and eat more fruit in its natural state. Let us eat freely of fresh grapes, apples, peaches, oranges, blackberries, and all other kinds of fruit which can be obtained. And so there's benefits. Grapes help the lung. They fight viral illnesses. They help the stomach. Drink a little wine for your stomach's sake. Apples help the lungs. People who eat an apple a day breathe an extra 150 milliliters of air with every breath. And all kinds of good things here. Benefits from eating good food. We're coming to a time when recipes for cooking will not be needed for God's people. That's us. We'll learn that the food God gave Adam in his sinless state is the best for keeping the body in a sinless state. And so 80% fresh fruit. And then some nuts and seeds. The food provided for our parents is wholesome and palatable. The diet is composed of, our patients, fruits and grains and nuts. Here in California, there's abundance of all kinds. So we want to have some nuts and seeds. There's benefits in certain nuts and seeds. For boosting the immune system, we find that the Brazil nuts have selenium. It's helpful. Pecans are particularly good because they are the highest in antioxidants, about twice as much as walnuts. Question?
Why would you think that she does not list vegetables here?
Why doesn't she list vegetables? Well, mostly because I picked out the fruit quotes for this. We'll get to the vegetables at the lunch one. Good question. But the leaves are for the healing of the nations. Yeah. And we're not. Well. All right, so nuts and seeds are good. One place she says 1/10 to 1/6 of a recipe could be nuts. That'd be 10 to 16% basically. So not a large portion, but she was talking about back then they had a lot of nut foods. You've heard of prosage or nutina. Those were sort of from that era, mostly nuts. So that wasn't real good. And then 20% cooked. Why do we do 20% cooked? I mean, there's people out there who pride themselves on doing 100% raw. And they do go to academic extents to figure out how to get everything raw, including things that are not palatable and aren't good for you raw. Well, why 20% cooked? I would advise all to take something warm into the stomach every morning at least. And so there's our 20%. You can do this without much labor. You can make graham gruel, oatmeal, whatever. I do not approve of eating much cold food for the reason that the vitality must be drawn from the system to warm the food until it becomes of the same temperature as the stomach before the work of digestion can be carried on. Another very simple yet wholesome dish is beans, boiled or baked. So oftentimes they have some beans out there for the folks as well. All right, then what about supplements? All the pills. Well, we've sort of cut back on supplements a bit. Ellen White called them patent nostrums. Do you know anywhere in the Bible, help me out, those of you who have been studying, where in the Bible do you find oral medication? Put this in your mouth and you'll get better. Open wide and I'll stick this on your tongue and you swallow it and it'll give you health. It was, go dip in the Jordan River, put this poultice on a figs, let me touch you. There was several times there were, balm of Gilead and other poultices used, but oral medication was not a big thing. I mean, we have drink a little wine for your stomach's sake, grape juice, but a practice that is laying the foundation of a vast amount of disease and of ever more serious evils is the free use of poisonous drugs. Well, who decides if it's poisonous? The manufacturer or you? Manufacturer's going to tell you it's not poisonous. When attacked by disease, many will not take the trouble to search out the cause of their illness. This is a huge problem these days. Seldom is the cause of illness figured out. Their chief anxiety is to rid themselves of pain and inconvenience. So they resort to supplements, vitamins, pills. Everything comes in a plastic bottle and has been sitting on the shelf for months, of whose real properties they know little. Or they apply to some physician for some remedy to counteract the results of their misdoing. Let me just keep going through the golden arches. Just give me a pill. But with no thought of making a change in their unhealthful habits. If immediate relief is not realized, another medicine is tried. Let's try coenzyme Q10 then. Let's try something else. And then another. Thus the evil continues. We have to figure out why this happened to us. A curse causeless does not light, right? Proverbs. So there's always, well, most often always, a reason that can be figured out. So we've sort of backed off on supplements a lot. Now, walking. We have a therapeutic walk right after breakfast. A short walk after a meal with the head erect and the shoulders back. Exercising moderately is a great benefit. Good not to study or exercise violently, but a good walk helps the digestion. The mind is diverted from self to the beauties of nature. The less the attention is called to the stomach, the better. If you sit there and think about your stomach and whether it hurts or not, it will probably start hurting. Reminds me when I was on foot service. We called it foot service. When I was in residency, we had one doctor that did nothing but feet. So we would follow him around and then help out and see the patients. And I was on that rotation, all these patients coming in, and my feet hurt. And of course, it was sort of a commensal relationship. They came in for their feet hurting, and the doctor sort of wined and dined them, and he benefited, and I don't know if they benefited, but it was a interesting relationship, as many of these doctor-patient relationships are. And so I was on that service. It was a 3-month service, and about 6 weeks into the service, I'm thinking, yeah, my feet hurt too. I was a little embarrassed. Well, about a year later, I was sitting down with all the residents in my year, and we were talking about that. One of them mentioned, yeah, and when I was on Dr. Wagner's service, all those patients coming in with their feet hurting, my feet started hurting. And we all said, yeah, mine too, mine too, mine too. So, all right. Now, stress management, biblical response living. Sickness of the mind prevails everywhere. 9/10 of the diseases from which men suffer have their foundation here. Not my patients. My patients all have something real. I mean, is it true? Or, worse yet, I feel sick. It's not my mind. Patients get very upset if you say it's your mind. But if you were playing the lottery, if you were working, putting money on the stock market, would you put your money where only 1 out of 10 chances you have of being a winner? Or would you put it where 9 times out of 10 you have a chance of being a winner? It makes absolutely no sense at all to start focusing on the physical first, or without reference at least to the mental. And so perhaps some living home trouble is like a canker eating to the very soul and weakening the life forces. Remorse for sin sometimes undermines the constitution and unbalances the mind. There are erroneous doctrines also, as that of the eternally burning hell and of the endless torment of the wicked, that, by giving exaggerated and distorted views of the character of God, have produced the same results upon sensitive minds. Infidels have made the most of these unfortunate cases, attributing insanity to religion. But this is a gross libel or lie, and one which they will not be pleased to meet by and by. The religion of Christ, so far from being the cause of insanity, is one of its most effectual remedies, for it is a potent soother of the nerves. And so with our patients coming in with, one thing I noticed in our, just after being here a few months is a lot of our patients, especially cancer patients, are hugely stressed out. And they weren't that way after they got their diagnosis. It was before they got their diagnosis. And some of them are pretty OCD. And so giving them a insight into why that is and what's going on in the mind and how to approach it from the Bible point of view is very valuable. Mid-morning, we have them drinking water, usually another quart of water, and taking a walk. A walk, even in winter, would be more beneficial to the health than all the medicine the doctors may prescribe. Well, that's a strong statement, isn't it? Have you seen the PDR recently? It's got about 5,000 drugs in it and all the descriptions as to what they're for. And, well, you can either take one of those 5,000 drugs or take a walk. There will be increased vitality, which is so necessary to health. The lungs will have needful action, for it is impossible to go out in the bracing air of a winter's morning without inflating the lungs. Actually, when you walk, you tend to breathe correctly, as opposed to breathing incorrectly. All right, then the water. In health and in sickness, pure water is one of heaven's choicest blessings. Its proper use promotes health. It is the beverage which God provided to quench the thirst of animals and man. Drink freely. It helps to supply the necessities of the system and assists nature to resist disease. And so we usually pick a couple hours after breakfast as a good time. And the rule of thumb, not necessarily from a quote or anything, is 30 minutes before a meal or 2 hours after a meal. And then we come to lunch. And here we have lunch where we're eating 80% fresh vegetables, herbs, and 20% cooked. This is an interesting concept. You asked about vegetables, Brent. In a medical institution, there are varied appetites to satisfy. Some require well-prepared vegetables to meet their particular needs. Others have not been able to use vegetables without suffering the consequences. The poor, sick dyspeptics need to be given many words of encouragement. Let the religious influence of a Christian home pervade the sanitarium. This will be conducive to the health of the patients. All these things have to be managed carefully and prayerfully. The Lord sees the difficulties to be adjusted, and He will be your helper. So, yes, we have to encourage people to eat their vegetables. Not everybody... It seems like fruit goes down okay, but when you give them raw broccoli salad... No, we don't do that, do we? When we give them tougher things, they're less likely to have been used to it. More can be accomplished for sick by regulating their diet than by all the baths that can be given them. So this is the main point of our program. We give a lot of baths too. And those are down here, but the food really is the bulk of getting them to get better because they haven't been eating right things. You are what you eat. If you want to change what you are, you better change what you eat. And so changing these people's diets makes a difference. And then we have our cooked stuff. Many are debilitated from disease and need nourishing, well-cooked food. And so again, 20% here. And we don't put the food on their plates. We just tell them this, and I have a feeling most of them go a little different percentages here than what we recommend. But you want them to have choice, to think about it, and to do what will work for them. And so we make it so that they have their choices. Then we send them out for a walk after lunch again. Exercise will aid the work of digestion. To walk out after a meal, hold the head erect, put back the shoulders, and exercise moderately will be a great benefit. The mind will be diverted from self to the beauties of nature. The less the attention is called to the stomach after the meal, the better. If you are in constant fear that your food will hurt you, it most assuredly will. Forget self and think of something cheerful.
Dr. Clark?
Yes.
Can we go back to the last slide? Okay, the sentence after your underlined, health reformers above all others should be careful to avoid extremes. Who decides what is an extreme and how do you avoid it?
How do you figure out what is an extreme and how do you avoid it? The best way to figure it out is compare everything you do to the standard, to what is written in like counsels on health. And then you can figure out what is going to be extreme or not. Otherwise, you're sort of like, in a boat out in the middle of a river with one paddle and going in circles. Or out in the middle of the ocean. The guidelines keep you in the right way. Now let's say, here's an interesting concept. One quote that's often thrown around is that nobody should set themselves up as a criteria for anybody else. Have you heard that one before? Now, if I tell you need to keep the Sabbath, am I setting myself up as a criteria, or am I setting up the Word of God as a criteria?
The Word of God.
How about if I say you should keep Sunday? Am I setting myself up as a criteria?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm only setting myself up as a criteria when I depart from the counsels. And so we wanted to make sure we follow. And that last one about the vegetables, some people can handle it, some can't, and you have to pray for those that can't and work with them. And, it's all a part of being, avoiding extremes.
Wouldn't it be like if I told you you should be eating all raw, and she doesn't say that?
Right, if you pick something that she doesn't say, like well-cooked foods. If I say all raw, then I'm sort of going to an extreme.
Extremism is also demonstrated by those who play a one-string guitar. They harp on one thing at the exclusion of everything else, and so it becomes an imbalance in their lives.
They used to call them monomaniacs. And so, yes, one thing is the whole answer. This happens big in supplements. Supplement salesman comes up, and my pill will fix anything. We had somebody call from, where was it? Singapore.
He's still calling.
He has this potion that he asked me, do you have trouble with your curing cancer and multiple sclerosis and hearing loss and all kinds of things, blindness? And well, we've got a potion that'll cure all those things. And he wants to sell it to us. All right, we talked about the walk and now more water. I should bathe frequently and drink freely of pure, soft water. Now, how much water can you safely drink? Well, most people can drink a gallon without any trouble. What happens if I drink more? Well, the difficulty comes if you wash out your electrolytes. What if I'm in danger of washing out my electrolytes? Well, quit drinking so much water or add a little bit of electrolyte. But for the most part, most people aren't drinking too much water. There's a few people that we call crazy, otherwise known in medical terms as psychogenic polydipsia, who drink too much water and their electrolytes go down and then they pass out and they end up in the hospital. But those are so rare, and it's not something that most people need to worry about. If this course should be followed perseveringly, resisting the inclination to do otherwise, it would work wonders. You want wonders to happen? In the recovery of health. And so lots of water. And that's the third water of the day. I send you at this time pulverized charcoal. So we do charcoal with the water. Let him drink the water after it has stood a while to extract the virtue. This should be cold when used. So we have people put charcoal in their water one time a day, usually a teaspoon. And it helps to pull out inflammation from their digestive tract. No other place in your body can you get charcoal so close to the bloodstream, because the blood vessels are right at the surface underneath the endothelium of the intestines.
Reverse osmosis, distilled. What is pure or soft water? Without minerals? So would that be distilled? Reverse osmosis has minerals in it still. And then there's this big thing that's in the world, oh, you gotta have minerals. What do you think? What's your take on that?
Yeah, good question. A lot of people ask, what kind of water shall I drink? Well, you want to have pure water for sure. Hard water is water with lots of minerals. Soft water has no minerals, essentially. And the difference being that when you have something in the water, you reduce its osmotic pull on pulling things, toxins out of your body. The purer it is, the more it's going to pull stuff out of your body. As far as drinking water, you want to find what needs to be done to your water to purify it. God waters His plants with distilled water. But the people who make the filters say if you drink the distilled water, you wash all the minerals out of your body. So somebody decided to test that. Let's see. If I was to depend on my water for the minerals I need for a day, and I took the USRDA minerals to establish how much I need of each mineral, how much mineral water would I have to drink to get my desired minerals for the day? At the end of the study, they concluded you would need 1,200 gallons of mineral water to get your minerals. Well, so from that we can conclude that you don't get your minerals from water, and by the converse, you don't lose minerals by drinking water. And so that was something created by the filter people. Somebody else wasn't happy with that, so they said, well, let's label all the minerals, radioactive labeling, and see where they go. So they gave people mineral water that had labeled minerals. They drank the labeled water. Sure enough, it went in, but guess what? They peed out all the minerals they'd taken in. Your body does not get minerals from just inorganic rocks. It has to have the mineral attached to some plant protein or phytochemical or fiber or something. And so you got to put your minerals on the ground and let them get into your tomato plant or your whatever food, and then you get the benefits of the minerals. And so reverse osmosis works great for some contaminants. Just a plain charcoal filter works good for others. Some things distillation works. And the water is quite polluted these days. The water going into LA, for example, the fish are much happier because they have almost toxic levels of tricyclic antidepressants. There's a lot of female hormones getting recycled through the system too. I mean, all these pills people take goes into the sewer system, goes in the water, and then some of them are very hard to remove and actually aren't removed. And so you end up with a population being medicated, whether they ask for it or not. Does that answer your question? Okay.
Thank you.
Clark, that last quote, what was it saying about putting the charcoal in a bag?
Yes, we'll get to the charcoal poultices down here, I think. But it was talking about charcoal fomentations for intestinal problems. Yes?
When you have them drink the charcoal, how long after a meal does that have to be?
The charcoal can be taken with the meal or after the meal. The only issue is what liquid you're taking on. Charcoal does not tend to pull out nutrients.
Oh.
It only tends to pull out toxins. How it knows the difference, I don't know. But for example, in dialysis patients, they run their blood against charcoal, but you don't hear of a dialysis patient coming up with some glaring nutritional deficiency. So I heard of one study, I haven't put my finger on it yet, but it was one of my friends from Wildwood said there was a study where they gave people charcoal and gave them vitamin pills. It took everything out of the vitamin pill, but when they ate food, it didn't take the naturally occurring vitamins out. So I thought that was fascinating. But yes, so we'll get back to charcoal here in a minute. All right, applying therapy before you go to bed. Frequent bathing is beneficial, especially at night, just before retiring. A lot of our fever treatment patients were very wiped out and spent the rest of the day wishing they could go to bed, and so we obliged them by putting their bath right before retiring so that they could get their sleep after such a heavy treatment. Or upon rising in the morning, it will take but a few moments to give the children a bath and to rub them until their bodies are aglow. So we tend to end with a rubbing type thing like mitten friction. This brings the blood to the surface, relieving the brain, and there will be less inclination to indulge in impure practices. All right, then the charcoal poultices. Who was it that wanted to know about charcoal poultices and fomentations? Charcoal. This was a case where the people were at camp meeting. One of the ladies, a young lady, got very sick. The doctors couldn't take care of her, and so they came to Ellen White. Sister White, have you any light for me on this case? If relief cannot be given our sister, she can but live a few hours. She is going to die. I replied, send to the blacksmith shop and get some pulverized charcoal. Make a poultice of it and lay it over her stomach and sides. In other words, pour all over her chest and sides. So it's a complete, it's not just a dab of poultice on what this seems to be sore. The doctor hastened away to follow my instructions. Soon he returned, saying relief came in less than half an hour after the application of the poultices. She is now having the first natural sleep she has had for days. And so the charcoal poultices at night are very important, and we're still experimenting with the best recipe for that. Then we send him to bed at 9:30. Make it a habit not to sit up after 9 o'clock. Every light should be extinguished. If you have lights on at night, it blows your melatonin. Even a night light, even a bright alarm clock. This turning night into day is a wretched, health-destroying habit. And this reading much by brain workers up to the sleeping hours is very injurious to health. It calls the blood to the brain, and then there is restlessness and wakefulness. And the precious sleep that should rest the body does not come when desired. And so if you get sleep in the evening rather than the morning's good, 2 hours good sleep before 12 o'clock is worth more than 4 hours after 12 o'clock. Oftentimes we say 1 hour before midnight is worth 2 afterwards. And so getting people to bed at a decent time is very, very helpful. So there's what our program looks like and why it's put together like that. But when we put people out in the regular society on this kind of program, they get over lots of different diseases. Following God's plan for health, we haven't touched on, there's many more health principles that we could touch on. But this is the ones that pertain to why the schedule is the way it is for our patients. Okay, any questions? Time for questions.
Being that they don't take supplements, you got 2 areas up there for them to take supplements on the chart.
Yes, we have written in here supplements here and here. And we've been putting less and less in there. We do take their labs, and if they're low on B12, that would be when they might take that. Or if they're low on vitamin D, that would be when they would take that. Or if there's something that they're particularly dealing with for which some certain herb... there's a difference between herbs and supplements. Herbs are like, you can see this is a leaf, a flower, a bark, or whatever. Supplement, it's a white powder that's gone through the factory and been concocted by some laboratory. It's sort of like in the sanctuary, there wasn't a tool of iron supposed to be lifted upon the stones of the altar or upon the temple. When we try to improve on God and we say, okay, vitamin A is good, so let's extract it from carrots. And we've come up with beta-carotene, but the carrot had 273 different active forms of vitamin A, so what happened to the other 272? You missed a few. And so we want to eat the best thing would then, if a typical herbal concoction might have dried carrots in it, well, that isn't a typical herb, but, you get the idea as opposed to extracting beta-carotene, coenzyme Q10, some other isolated one thing in megadoses. Other questions? Yes?
I'll have a statement, not a question. Sally brought the issue of olive oil. And although Ellen White, as far as I know, never in any place specifically said do not eat olive oil, there is what appears to be credible scientific evidence that olive oil is not good for your arterial system. And the doctor that did the experiments was named Dr. Robert Vogel, and he did flow mediation dilation studies. That's where you put a blood pressure cuff on the arm, pump it up and keep it tight for 5 minutes, and then you let it go, and you measure the blood flow through your artery. And so he did this with a meal, or did this, I forget, you had different meals and before and after a meal, and when he would do it with a meal containing olive oil, the blood was slowed up like 25-30%. And so his conclusion was, after doing that study, was that it appears that olive oil has as much of a hit on the intima of your artery, the inside lining of your artery, as a burger and fries. And I was very disappointed to read that.
Wouldn't that have been the action after any oil, any free or whatever you call that oil, not specifically olive oil?
Yes, it definitely does. It makes it so the body, it causes endothelial dysfunction. The inside of the blood vessel no longer responds to relaxing messages and doesn't relax when the flow picks up or the nitric oxide comes in. All the oils, all the margarines. And let me just comment on this. Some people will point out, well, but they used olive oil in the sacrifices and so forth, or the meat offerings. And I was very interested to look at an analysis of the Exodus by a scientist where he looked at, okay, children of Israel have to get across the Red Sea in one night. But there's 1.5 million of them. How are they all going to get across this river in one night? How can you know, how do I get 1 million people? Can they go 2 by 2? How many years would that take? They literally had to have a mile-wide dry path and basically march forward. And then they looked at how much water it would take to supply 1.5 million people every day. It was literally multiple trainloads of water to supply everybody with enough water. Okay, it's an astronomical logistics problem to get these people taken care of. Now you're out in the middle of the desert. Where are you going to get enough olive oil for everybody to have a bottle and spread it all over everything? This stuff is a rare commodity. It isn't like everybody's got olive oil and it's everywhere. It's just not going to happen. Today we can go down to the supermarket and buy gallons of any kind of oil, because since the industrial age they make oil out of everything. But it wasn't like they were using olive oil every night with garlic over their toast or something. It was a pretty precious commodity, and I don't think it was used as a regular dietary item. You had a question, Kate?
Was it Elijah or Elisha that went and stayed with the woman and she used flour and oil to make bread?
Yes, it stated that she used flour and oil to make bread. We don't know how much, or if it was only oil and only flour, or if they used water, or whatever. And then there was the lady that had the oil that the pot just kept pouring, right? Yeah. Yes. What's that? And she sold it all. For burning in the lamps? Yes, right.
And for putting on their skin.
People usually don't fuss about if we say their broccoli isn't good for them. Oh, forget the broccoli. Okay, it wasn't good for me anyway. Oil? Oh, you can't take away my oil. And why is that? Oil is a driver of the appetite. There's a reason why the fat in the fast food restaurants keeps going up. A few years ago, the Surgeon General of the United States came in and said, you guys are not helping the health of the nation. Could you please lower the amount of fat in your menus? To all the fast food restaurants. 2 years later, he came back and looked. None had lowered it. Many had raised it. It's because fat drives food consumption. The Greasy Spoon restaurant is still in business.
You know, that lady that used the oil, at least the one, she was a pagan. She didn't have the health message. And God winks at our ignorance, right?
Yes, right. That's right. Okay, any other questions?
I have a question on
Yes.
coconut milk.
Coconut
Because I
milk.
noticed it still has oil in it, so that's a whole product in a can of coconut milk compared to coconut oil.
Should be. It's supposed to just be like you make any kind of milk where you blend up the original product with water.
Even though it has oil.
Well, everything has a little bit of oil, even tomatoes. But it's not like that's a refined, separated product. Now, coconut oil is different, and we may touch on that one of these days. Other questions? Yes?
Did you find the answer yet about the Israelites were told to eat their meat from the sacrifices?
Question is about the priests were required to eat some of the meat from the sacrifices. And how can that be healthy? So it's a good question. I'm not sure I know the answer to that. And you know, some of the priests were particularly chastised because they didn't cook it, like Eli's sons would stick the fork into the raw meat and pull it out before it got cooked, and so they were sort of given a hard time. You must also realize that unlike meat today, which is with all the fat, especially cultured to have fat in it, and the blood, back then they drained the blood and the fat was cut away, and they weren't cultured, given hormones so that the fat would be marbled into the muscle, that they had a much different product than what would come out of McDonald's today.
In fact, didn't they soak it in water till every bit of the blood, till there's just nothing left but the fiber, the flavor? That's why they put all the herbs and everything back in, because it had no flavor. Once the blood and the urine was taken out of it, and that's what makes it tasty today.
Yes. Yes, Joseph.
Kosher meat has no blood or fat in it.
Comment on that thing Nancy was talking about. From what I understand with the meat in the sanctuary, I didn't understand it was a symbolic thing, and it wasn't like they were supposed to eat it as a dietary thing. They took like a very small portion of it, and it was part of the symbol of sacrifice. And I think that's why God was frustrated with Eli's sons and some of the other people that would eat it, a lot of it, or eat it with the blood, like you're talking about. So that's one way I've heard it explained that way.
It's really just a matter of time that we'll be talking about why Jesus ate lamb or fish. We're not living in the same age. All the pollutants that are in this world today, the chemicals and the antibiotics that are fed animals, it's a whole different ballgame. And
She said a time would come when it would not be safe to eat.
I was up in Vermont, and just before we came here doing a series, and one of the guests, lady from the community, raised her hand and said, well, Jesus ate fish. What about eating fish? Here we are in Vermont. All the fish are good. How can it be a problem eating a fish out of these clean rivers? And somebody else raised their hand and said, have you seen the recommendations? Nobody's supposed to eat more than 8 ounces of fish a day from these rivers because they're so polluted. Yeah, it's hard to find something that isn't polluted. Well, very good. Yes?
Well, I was just going to say, obviously meat wasn't part of God's original dietary plan. He gave Noah and his family permission to eat it after the flood because there was a scarcity of vegetation. And also, I think he did it because men were living too long and the thoughts of their hearts were only evil continually. If you look at the lifespans after the flood, they went down very precipitously. But you notice that when the Israelites were in the Exodus, it was only when they murmured and complained that he sent them flesh food, and then they had a plague as a result. He gave them manna.
Yes. Wasn't the best food, for sure.